My name is Gorman, and in this episode of Semilla.VC, I sat down with Patricio Brito, co-founder of Fitzer, Mexico's first hard seltzer. Prior to founding Fitzer, Patricio held roles for Lime in France, Spain, and Switzerland. And before Lime, he was Uber's lead operations and logistics manager for the Caribbean, out of their Mexico City office. Patricio earned a Bachelor of Arts in political science from Yale University, as well as an MBA from Wharton. In this episode, we learned why so many Wharton MBAs work in Latin America, how taxi unions exert influence to ensure Uber does not enter their markets, how Fitzer entered the Mexican alcohol oligopoly and competed for both market share and scarce resources. And we also talked about why Patricio lives in Monterrey, Mexico. We discussed all this and more in this episode of Semilla.VC. Patricio, could you start by telling the audience a bit more about your work history up to and including co-founding Fitzer?
Sure. So let's just start from scratch, actually. I'm Patricio, born in New York, grew up in Ecuador, half Dominican, did my high school and elementary school in Ecuador, did undergrad at Yale, political philosophy and international development, wanted to change the world. Then went into the CFPB, a new agency built by the Obama administration to avoid another financial crisis. So did financial regulation for a couple of years, and then wanted to work in the Caribbean and got this opportunity to work for Uber launching its Caribbean markets with an amazing team. Somehow ended up being based out of Mexico City to do that. So that's where my first interaction with Mexico. Left Uber to start this JV operations company in Switzerland with a couple of friends. And we had a JV with Lime Bike at that point. It was a small company that had a couple of markets in the southeast of the US. And it ended up becoming this big company called Lime. And we got acqui-hired and rolled into the larger organization. Meanwhile, I was doing my MBA at Wharton, my co-founders and the whole team in Europe, we became part of the Lime team, and we helped launch the rest of Europe, Paris, Spain, and Germany, etc. And I brought a couple of people from Uber and from Wharton on board for the Latin American team. I left Lime to continue doing my Wharton MBA, and also because I had this conversation with a couple of friends at the MBA that there was this white space to create a new category of beverages in Latin America. And I think what I've been doing is bringing new categories of things to different places that don't have them. So it made sense just in terms of the way I think and the way I do things to do this. And I was more excited to do that than be an employee at that point. So I quit, gave up a bunch of equity on that end, but it was the right thing for me, and decided to move to that Mexico was the best market to launch. And within Mexico, Monterrey made the most sense. We wanted to make sure we could prove market fit quickly somewhere that wasn't that costly to do, where we can show traction. And so there's 3 big cities in Mexico. Mexico City is the most expensive one to launch. It's huge and it's hard to prove traction in consumer goods. It just takes a long time. Monterrey and Guadalajara seemed like the next options. There's Querétaro and León, which are smaller cities. Monterrey has between 5 to 6 million people and has the highest GDP per capita in Mexico. It also has the highest consumption of light beer and sparkling water. One of the trends that we were looking at when it comes to hard seltzer was health and wellness. So where is the strongest health and wellness trend? And it's definitely here in Monterrey. And so we spent our whole second year of our MBA working on this idea, working on our pitch, traveling to different countries. We first thought of doing this in Central America because we thought smaller countries quicker to get a product market fit. But the amount of hours that you dedicate to a business is the same if it's in Russia or in China or if it's in Fiji. It really doesn't matter. And so you want to get to like the largest market possible because you get more bang for your buck there. Also, it's easier to fundraise. And so we just spent a whole year fundraising and trying to figure out how to make this happen, how to develop the product, how to develop the brand, how to develop a go-to-market strategy. And 4 days after graduation, we picked up our bags and moved to Monterrey and launched the same year in December 2019. Since then we raised a seed round in 19. Then last year we started raising a pre-series A round, and then this year we just closed a huge deal with the large media conglomerate here in Mexico. It's probably our largest check yet, and we are around $10 million in total of fundraised capital in these 3 years. And so it's been a huge undertaking. I think we've been in all the ups and downs that comes with being a founder, and super excited to see what's next. I think we poked a couple of bears here when we created the first hard seltzer in Mexico and Latin America. And we always want to do things differently. So we created this also unique network of dark stores to sell our product directly to consumers. We became the first beverage company in Mexico to become a B Corp. And so there's a lot of things that we've been trying to do to disrupt the status quo in the beverage industry. As I did previously in other industries, transportation or financial regulation. And yeah, this is where we are. That was a very long intro. Sorry.
Do not be sorry. That was a very good intro. Tell us a little bit more about how you raised that money to start, the first hard seltzer in Mexico. Are there food VCs in Mexico? Are you looking at food VCs in the United States? And are VCs like drinking the beverage in that initial meeting? How does that work?
Yeah. So at the beginning, it was difficult to get just out of the gate. We started with angels because I think you need to start from like the bottom of the pyramid to get to the top of the pyramid in terms of fundraising. You want to have like a really strong pitch, a really strong story before you get to like the top VCs. It's something I always recommend. Our really big mistake, we got into Mexico City. We weren't even here. We're just in our MBAs, and we got a meeting with a big family office, and we didn't even know what we were going to do for distribution or how distribution worked in Mexico. And that was like a complete failure on our part because this is why you need to pitch a lot to get. It's kind of like playing Zelda, or I don't know that was a very 90s reference, but whatever game you have different bosses that you need to work your way up to. And so we started with angels, a lot of family and friends who believed in us, understood the category. And then we started reaching out to people in the industry. So people who are either in production and distribution or know about alcohol in Mexico. And we started pitching it to them. It made sense for them. And so they started investing, and we started creating this, I don't know if it's a moat, but for us, it's how do you get the most people around that you need in your business to be successful, to be part of the round? So how do you get a distributor, a producer, people who understand how to build a brand in the space, how to manage a brand? So we brought in really interesting people like the CEO of Heineken Latin America, people who had been doing distribution here for a while, et cetera, et cetera. And so this created this ability to have this network that helped us really through the pandemic. When we couldn't get cans, we just had to call a couple of people, and we were able to get through that. And on the side of VCs, and that helped us move into family offices and corporate venture funds, and we were able to close a couple of those. In terms of VCs in the US, most of the CPG VCs in the US that do smaller size checks, they do them. I think in CPG you need to have some traction for anyone to look at you. And once you have some traction, there are this medium-sized VCs that you can get less than $1 million or between $1 and $3 million. But those VCs tend to be very regional or very national. They don't really invest outside of the US, Canada. And so Mexico is it's a hard one. And then the ones who can invest, they need to do really big checks. So you're talking about your VGM partners, Errol Cartington, and then there are PE firms in Mexico. I remember we for pre-Series A, we got into an investment committee, and the partners all loved it, the LPs liked it, but at the end of the day, it's really hard to pitch a startup to a PE firm because it's really outside their scope and their thesis. And even if they love you, at the end of the day, they can't go against their main thesis, right? It's usually more mature companies that they invest in. I don't know if I answered the question.
You certainly did. You certainly did. So in your intro answer, you mentioned that you poked some incumbent bears.
Right. So there's this duopoly in terms of beer here in Mexico. In most countries, it's a monopoly in Latin America, but here in Mexico, there's two large ones. It's Heineken and ABI. They both bought the two large beer companies, the one from the north and the one from the center and the south of Mexico. And they didn't really have it in their plans to launch a hard seltzer. And so we felt pretty comfortable when we launched in 2019. We're like, well, we're going to be the first mover advantage for like 3 years because in their pipeline it wasn't until 2023 or late 2022 where they would launch. And so we were pretty comfortable with that. And then they started moving really fast because they didn't want to let another independent brand like it happened in the US take over the hard seltzer market. And so they did it a lot earlier than they thought. And so it also helped us to bring awareness to the category and build a category, because when it's just one brand, it's not a category. It's just one brand that does something different, right? Or one product that's a little bit different. And so that helped bring some awareness to the category. And now with what we're gonna do with mass media, this is going to bring another level of awareness to the category, and hopefully we'll be poking more bears so that they start investing heavily in the category and get us to that level of awareness that will bring bring the hard seltzers to a level of growth and market size that's interesting for everyone. Right now, one of the questions people ask is, well, how is it compared to the US? Well, hard seltzers in Mexico are really in 2016, 2017 in terms of where it was in the US. And so we are still, when it boomed, it was really in 2019, 2020. And so we're like 3 years from there. And the thing about CPG is that it's kind of planting a plant where it doesn't matter how much more water you put into it, you need to let it grow. It's not going to grow faster just because you pour more water into it. And so I think that probably resonates to a lot of businesses, but it definitely rings true for CPG.
When Fitzer was working with bottlers in Mexico at the beginning and right now, is it one bottler that would allow you to penetrate all of the Mexican market, or is it a constellation of bottlers? And to follow up on that previous question, are either of the duopoly big players that are the beer manufacturers, are they able to box you out of any part of that, like producer or distribution chain?
Yeah, so in Mexico, if you want to produce beer, there aren't really any medium-sized brewers. They're all really small and craft. So just to give you an idea, like there's no one that has a good size because there's a huge duopoly. So there's no one producing enough product, and the ones that produce for most of small craft beers here in Mexico, they're very small. And so there are many co-packers, which we employ for Fitzer, that do a lot of things in the RTD space, in the ready-to-drink space, canned cocktail space, value wine space, coolers, and all these, and some sodas, regional sodas, etc. So there are co-packers that we use, and there's some, and even the large companies use these co-packers. So you'll see ABI and Heineken contracting out certain SKUs that they can't produce because they need a smaller scale, because their production minimums are very high, and so they might contract out some stuff, some specific things that might be seasonal or in and out, etc. And so that's what we use, but we've never been boxed out by producers in that sense. Where you can feel the crunches in terms of commodities, right? Because if Coke decides that they want to buy all the slim cans or increase their purchase by 20%, that creates chaos in the aluminum market, that creates chaos in the can market. And that's how you could get boxed out, right? There was a lot of panic in 2021 about getting cans, because most of the large producers decided they wanted to have a huge stock of cans in case they ran out, and so that started pushing everyone out, and we were just outside of people's office begging for space in the production line. And so that's a way that you can be boxed out. That's about it, I think. But those are true. There's a very real ways where you can lose your business. You just don't have any commodities to use to produce you have no inputs, right?
What's the regulatory environment for alcohol in Mexico and in Latin America from the producer side? And if you were to try to expand, you mentioned Central America in your intro answer, would that be a difficult thing to do based on the laws and licenses, or would that be something that wouldn't be too difficult?
Yeah, so we actually sell in a couple of Central American markets, and we're working towards expanding in South America. I don't think it's not very complicated. There is no 3-tier system like there is in the US, where no one can produce. I mean, there's 3 parts of the business: producing, distributing, and selling. And so you can't sell alcohol, distribute, or produce. You can't do 2 out of those 3 or 3 out of those 3. So you have to be a very different entity, and so or own the brand. So the people who own the brand have distributors, and distributors sell to the supermarkets who are independently owned, and so here in Latin America it doesn't matter. So the big beer companies have their own stores, and they distribute directly and they sell directly. And we use 3PLs, and we have our direct contact with all the supermarkets, etc. And when it comes to exportation, we just have a local distributor that sells directly to the supermarkets. And what you need to do is make sure that your labeling goes according with whatever the local regulation is. I think that's just the biggest blocker, but because it increases your cost. If you have to print a label and put it on the can, that increases your cost, and it makes it difficult to move faster. That's about it. It's a labeling thing, outside of anything else. It seems small, but in consumer goods, if something increases your costs, then your margin is lower, or your ability to grow revenue becomes more limited, because it affects the public price.
You mentioned that you got your MBA at Wharton. Coincidentally, one of my last interviews was with Greg Mitchell, who also got his MBA at Wharton and now is a VC in Peru. What about this program is so uniquely international and especially towards the region of Latin America?
So one of the reasons I decided to go to Wharton was because when I was at Uber, a lot of the people who I admired a lot within Uber Latin America were all from Wharton. And 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 then I started realizing how strong the Wharton network is in Latin America. And it's been like this for a while. So just for, I don't know if you know Topo Chico.
I'm under 21, so I've never heard of Topo Chico.
It's a sparkling water.
Joking.
Yeah. So okay, so so it's a sparkling water from Monterrey. It's been around here for like more than 100 years. And so the guy who started Topo Chico, he sent his son to Wharton. And that was 1910, 1915. And so it's a network that's been building out for a very long time here in the north of Mexico and in Latin America in general. I think a lot of people have been going from Latin America to Wharton, at least in the business space, and it's a network that's been growing for decades, and so if not a century, and so that's why I think it's a pretty strong one.
Could you tell the audience more about your time at Uber in Mexico City and also Lyft in Europe, and how you were both fighting incumbents with the taxis and governments with Lyft or with Lime and Uber? Could you tell us how those experiences really allowed you to build a strong skill set to found Fitzer?
So moving into the CPG space was a little bit of a relief because I never had to see anyone close my business. Like I've never been afraid of getting shut down. So I was in Mexico City, but the markets, even though I was in Mexico City, most of my time I spent them in the Caribbean markets. But the markets honestly are pretty similar throughout in terms of there's always a local government that responds to the interests of taxi unions, which tend to be super corrupt, and and in some cases they respond to organized crime, and so it can get very dangerous in certain parts of Mexico to launch Uber because people's lives are threatened, and driver lives are threatened. And so in a lot of those cities, a lot of things happened. A lot of Ubers got burnt out, drivers got kidnapped, and so operations got shut down. In the Caribbean, we never had such things. We did have in Puerto Rico, I remember, the Taxi Drivers Association would look out for Ubers and try to stop them, try to get the passengers out of the cars, and then sometimes try to assault the drivers, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that can happen in different markets, depending how aggressive the taxi union is. Usually markets that have a big tourist, a lot of tourists traveling to the market have the most aggressive unions. So if you think about Puerto Rico, the union was a lot more aggressive than in Santo Domingo. In Punta Cana, in Dominican Republic, we never launched because the union is so aggressive that even the hotel owners are like, we don't want you guys to launch. Even the tourists wanted, because the union is just going to become very violent, and so it's not going to attract any more tourists. And so if you are in a market that's not very touristy, it's a lot easier in terms of violence, because you won't get that much violence, and it's more of a term in terms of trying to figure out how to work with the government to make sure that people have a chance to also make a living, and the consumers get a better choice or another choice. But yeah, and in terms of Lime was harder to implement in terms of of being a little bit more bold with government regulations. Um, in Uber, we could always play in a gray area where, well, it's not regulated, so um, you can always go to court, and while you're in court, you can still operate, and you can get an injunction or whatever. And there's a lot of ways to get through it. Then you pass legislation and make sure you're in the green. But in Lime and in all this shared shared scooter, shared bike businesses, it's very hard to do it because you are in public, and it's very easy for the municipality just to take your bikes away or your scooters away. So you need to be sure you're in line with what the municipality wants and be on their good side. But the local governments can really make it impossible to make a business out of it. For example, in a couple of cities in Latin America, even though they were hugely popular, the government would just limit the amount of scooters you could have per city. And it's not a business if you can only have 200 scooters. It's impossible to have, your fixed costs are too high. And so it's impossible to make a business out of it. Or if they're not limiting the amount of scooters, they're charging you crazy amounts of money just to operate your business. And so that's not a business either. And so for a little while, when different brands were competing against each other and there was a lot of VC money involved, people are making these very bad business decisions to just pay all this cash to run a business. But at the end of the day, it's a very highly regulated business. And during the pandemic, it went bust because there was no one in the streets, and now it's picking up again. So hopefully, I hope it gets better. I know in certain cities in Europe it works really well, and in Latin America as well, and in the U.S. But it's one of those businesses that got forced to become a break even or profitable business very violently because of the pandemic. So hopefully that they can get to that soon.
Was it ever hard at Lime, Uber, or even now Fitzer to compete against incumbents when maybe they weren't playing by the rules? Was it ever difficult? You gave some examples, but was it ever tough to play by the rules? And did these companies always play by the rules because maybe they were held to a different legal standard than, say, the taxi unions?
Yeah. So in terms of taxi unions being violent and all this stuff, it was, I mean, there's no, you can't play their game because you're not going to do the same thing. But it was very frustrating, yeah, because a lot of the cops or the general authority level officials would not do anything about it. So that was very frustrating. But when you know you're providing a service or you have a product that people want to buy, at the end of the day, the consumer decides what they want, right? And if incumbents are pushing you out, but people are pulling you in, then you shouldn't be worried. At the end of the day, if people want your product, they're gonna buy your product. And even if it, as we know, people buy illegal things because they want it. There's nothing that the government can do or taxi unions can do or other businesses can do to stop you if people want this kind of products. If they don't want it, then, or they kind of want it but don't really care for it, then yeah, you can be easily pushed out. But as long as you have a product that people want and that you think is the best one in the market and that you're pushing for that, it becomes harder and harder for incumbents to do it, unless they just copycat you and do it themselves. But in terms of Uber, I don't think the taxi unions would ever do they don't have the capabilities to do their own apps. And in terms of scooters, they don't. I don't know who the competition would be in terms of unions, but I didn't see anyone else try to do it. In terms of Fitzer, yeah, that's the one where it's harder to be very differentiated because the incumbents do have the capabilities to do something similar than that you are doing, right? But you need to make sure that you have a different message, that you create a strong community and a strong brand. And being the first to the market is a huge advantage in this space. And if you can build the right cap table and have the right people on board, then you can fight the fight.
Okay, so finally, I have to ask Peter Thiel's famous contrarian question, but with a uniquely Semilla.VC twist. What important truth about Latin America do very few people agree with you on?
So I have a couple of those. One is, I think a couple of people would agree, maybe not others, but I think outside cash in Latin America is more sees more of the potential in Latin America than Latin American cash. And you just have to look at a lot of the large startups in Latin America where their money comes from, and most of the people leading these rounds do not have Latin cash. And another one, I would say, a lot of people fight me on this one, but Travis Kalanick probably is responsible for a lot of the startup scene or responsible for the startup scene in many countries in Latin America. Maybe Colombia is not one of them because Rappi was there, and Rappi and Uber are really big there. But at least in Mexico, I can tell you that you can if you throw a stone in a startup meeting or in a meet and greet, you'll hit a lot of Uber people, and that's just because of that drive, that vibe that a lot of the Latin Uber folks had, and the network they built, and a lot of the great things that they all went to build, and so. That might seem a very contrarian view, I think, in the US for sure.
Well, Patricio, thank you so much for coming on the Semilla.VC podcast today. I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you, Trip.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Semilla.VC podcast. My name is Trip Gorman. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you view the podcasts. And also check out our weekly newsletter, Dealflow LA, which can be found by going to dealflow.la. Thank you.